Well, greetings and welcome to today's Hot Rod Extravaganza, in which we're going to do the unthinkable, which is to convert the 350 Chevy engine in that chopped and channeled 1930 Ford Coupe that you saw in a previous video from a single Edelbrock 4-barrel and air scoop and HEI ignition into 3 2-barrel carburetors, each with their own little helmet air cleaner, and a replica old-fashioned distributor made by Pertronix. It's going to look just like the old original point distributor, even with a little window to lift to set the dwell, but it's going to be an electronic distributor. I already have the parts on hand, and I'm going to do this in 2 separate steps. The first step is I'm going to replace the HEI distributor with the Pertronix replacement, get it timed, get all the cables, the coil, everything connected properly, get it running perfectly. Then I'm going to convert over to the 3.2 carburetors. That way, if anything acts up with them, I'll know it's not the distributor ignition system, it's the carburetors themselves. Let's go on inside and let me show you what the 3.2s look like with the adapter manifold. I think you'll get a kick out of it. I've kind of set all the parts together here on display so that while I eat dinner at the table right beside this cabinet, I can drool over the carburetors. These are 3 Stromberg 97's with their little helmet air cleaners, and then a vintage speed 3 into 4-barrel adapter intake manifold. As you can see, it's going to look pretty slick. Alright, I removed the distributor cap, and in an HEI ignition it also includes the coil that sits up here on top of the distributor, and I have carefully marked the position of the base of the distributor by looking at where the vacuum advance tube is pointing, and I've also marked over here where the rotor is pointing. Okay, so next step is to remove the bolt and crowfoot down here that holds the distributor in place and keeps it from either lifting or rotating, and now it's time to lift it up and out of the engine. And the distributor has been lifted out, and you see it here. The reason it has to be replaced is not only cosmetic, because this is a very modern style of distributor and it had that bright red cap and red wires which are kind of jarring, but also when that 3.2 manifold goes on, it's going to reach back here far enough that the large diameter of this distributor would interfere with it being able to set properly on that intake manifold. Now here's the brand new Pertronix old-fashioned looking distributor. You see it has the old small diameter black top, and it even has the little trap door here so that you'd go in with your Allen wrench to set dwell, although there are no points in this at all. It is a magnetic triggering distributor. Also, there is no built-in coil up here in the top of the cap like there is in the HEI system, so I'm going to have a separate coil. But anyway, let's pull the cap, and then we'll make sure that the base of the distributor goes in exactly like the HEI, in the right direction, aiming like right about there. And we'll also have to be sure that the rotor is pointing over here when the distributor is properly seated in the engine. Here we have the Pertronix distributor with the cap off. You see that the rotor is conventional, just typical of Chevrolet V8s, but there are no points or condenser in this. We have a magnetic trigger to initiate the spark. Now looking way down in that little black well there at the rear of the engine, you can see a slotted steel rod. Well, that's what drives the oil pump, and as you can see, the slot now is sort of parallel to the firewall of the car, yet on the distributor, for it to fit in properly, that slot needs to be perpendicular to the firewall of the car. So I'm going to have to reach in there with a long screwdriver and adjust the oil pump slot in its drive rod to where it's in the proper position for the distributor gear to fully mesh and set down in the engine. You can see the drive there for the oil pump. Looks like the end of a big fat screwdriver nestled down in the bottom of the gear. And now I hope you can see down in here that the slot is facing perpendicular to the firewall. Maybe you can't see it, but trust me, it is. Okay, the new distributor is dropped into place. You see that the vacuum advance snout is pointing right here at the original mark, and the rotor is pointing over here. So it's not in perfect time. We're going to have to adjust the base in relations to the position of the rotor to adjust the timing to get it just right. But what you want is close enough for the car to start and idle. And I think this is close enough. Okay, so let's go ahead and put on the cap. We'll install the coil and the plug wires, and then I think we'll be ready to check it, see if the car will run, and set the timing. Now, just to make sure that all the ignition parts work together well, I got a Pertronix flamethrower coil to go along with that distributor, and I have mounted a chrome coil bracket up here on the firewall. It's there for two reasons. Number one is you can't mount it up here because that would interfere with the 3.2 manifold, and when it's mounted on the firewall, the coil stays a lot cooler, which is better. So for two reasons, I have mounted the chrome coil clamp up here on the firewall. Let's install the coil and then wire it up and put the cap on and the spark plug wires. Distributor cap on, the coil is wired with the switch hot wire from the ignition, and the black and red wires over here to the distributor. Now it's time to install the spark plug wires. Well, step one is finished. A new distributor and coil have been installed with a brand new set of spark plug wires. The ignition timing has been set, so now it's time to move on to the removal of the air scoop and the 4-barrel carburetor, and then we can test fit that 3.2 adapter manifold. Okay, the scoop and air cleaner have been removed, and now it's time to disconnect all the hoses, linkage, and everything else, and remove the Edelbrock 4-barrel carburetor. Okay, everything has been removed from the carburetor, and including the 4 half-inch nuts that hold it to the manifold, so it's time to lift it off, and then we can go get that 3.2 adapter manifold and test fit it. And while I'm at it, I gotta say that this black Pertronix distributor and coil looks so much better than that giant bright red HEI distributor. I should have installed this a long time ago. And here's the 3.2 manifold installed, and as you can see, there's very little clearance back here between it and even this small distributor cap, so there's no way this thing could have fit with that giant HEI distributor. So there it is. It does fit. I was worried about it interfering up here, but no. It sits down nice and flat. So I guess now it's time to machine the manifold for vacuum lines, for the vacuum modulator to help the transmission shift, for vacuum advance, for the distributor, and then install it, and then start installing the carburetors and linkage. I just couldn't resist seeing how it's going to look with the carburetors in place, and I think you've got to admit that's a whole lot more impressive than just a single 4-barrel nestled under a kind of generic scoop. I can't wait. I'm starting to get excited about this. A lot of work left to do. The linkage, the fuel supply, and vacuum lines. Lots of work. Okay, so let's quit moaning and get started. And here's the 3.2 manifold installed, and as you can see, there's very little clearance back here between it and even this small distributor cap, so there's no way this thing could have fit with that giant HEI distributor. So there it is. It does fit. I was worried about it interfering up here, but no. It sits down nice and flat. So I guess now it's time to machine the manifold for vacuum lines, for the vacuum modulator to help the transmission shift, for vacuum advance, for the distributor, and then install it, and then start installing the carburetors and linkage. I thought a long time about where to put the vacuum ports in this adapter manifold. Now on the aluminum high-rise, that air gap manifold that's on the engine, there's really no accessible place, and you hate to drill because then some of the aluminum shavings will get into the engine. So what I've done is I drilled a hole here in a very thin area that's sort of out of where all the excitement's going to be taking place, and then I'm using some JB weld and pressing these little devices here that I made. I cut down. They normally have like a barb on either end of them, but I cut it down nice and short to where it was very unobtrusive. And I've already drilled a hole over here, and now I'm going to press this one, finish pressing it into place with the JB weld. That should give me good vacuum ports for the vacuum advance and for the vacuum modulator from the TH350 transmission. Well, I've been real busy assembling the carburetors, linkage, fuel inlets, intake manifold, and vacuum ports. As you can see, the linkage is progressive. You can just run off this middle two-barrel with that much travel, but then if you step a little harder, you see that those secondaries on the outside open, and you have to be sure they open all the way, and I'm assuming you're going to get quite a little boost in acceleration when that happens. Okay, so you can run around getting really good gas mileage with this much travel, or go a whole lot faster with that much. Looking good so far. I think it's time now to install this on the intake manifold and then start coming up with the fuel delivery system and also some way to connect to this with the accelerator pedal so it can be pulled smoothly. Well, it's a momentous occasion when the tri-power setup is finally attached to that air gap manifold. The vacuum lines are connected, and now it's time to fabricate a fuel delivery system, and also, and this is going to be challenging, accelerator linkage, which is totally safe. It won't bind, it won't stick. You really have to be careful. Okay, so that's the next step. I think this would be a really nice spot for that chrome fuel block to be installed. It's centrally located and can distribute fuel to each of the carburetors. It's going to be suspended about 2 inches then above the intake manifold, and is going to be the bracket is going to be held by these bolts right here. So I've started fabricating the bracket that will hold it. I need to do some finishing on the edges and corners and then bend it into shape, and I'll show it to you when that's done. Okay, here's the bracket all bent up and fit perfectly to the fuel block and painted semi-gloss black. Now it's time to attach the fuel block. I put in all of the little spouts that it needs to deliver fuel and to receive fuel. I'm going to install it on the bracket and then install the bracket on the engine. Alright, there's the fuel block installed on its platform, and now the hot setup on these old cars is to use this red neoprene tubing, and so I'm going to cut it to fit and then plumb the 3 carburetors. I'm waiting on a fuel pressure regulator that's going to be sitting right here before I can do the sort of the primary side here of the fuel delivery. I ordered it 9 days ago, and of course it's not here yet, but when it gets here, it's going to sit right there. I also noticed that every single piece, every nut, bolt, washer, everything in this pile of parts that I ordered, even the air cleaners, is declared to cause cancer and reproductive harm in California. So I'm glad I don't live there because I'd probably have cancer by now. But anyway, it just seems really over the top. I mean, what are you going to do here? Get a pregnant woman to chew on this red hose? Come on, give me a break. And there is the red fuel line, plumbed. Tried to keep the curvatures consistent. Now it's time to focus on the accelerator linkage, and that's going to really be tricky. Okay, somehow it's going to reach in here, grab a hold of this arm here on the primary carburetor, and be able to pull it straight back without hitting anything that gets in the way. Now my initial plan is to use this polished 1/4" steel rod that I bent last night, and it can engage the holes in the primary arm there and come out the back, and I think be pulled by a cable that comes through the firewall right here. I'm going to try to kind of mock it up and see if there's a way I can do that without it pulling like this, you know, because this is not really lined up. This is more for a 4-barrel, whereas here we've got narrower 2 barrels. So let's see what I can come up with. Okay, here's my plan. I've cut out a unusually shaped piece here of 1/8 inch cold roll steel, and as you can see, there is a boss on the manifold back there and right here. And my plan is to have this bolt down securely, and then right here construct like a tower that comes up and will allow me to pull on that rod and the linkage back far enough that it can open all 6 of the butterflies. And then I'm going to use a cable that's going to come around like this and go in here. So it's going to come out. The cable will make a sort of a gentle S bend, and then there'll be a tower to hold this end of the cable. Okay, I'll be back in a few minutes and give you a progress report. Okay, here's that piece of 1/8 inch steel. It bolted in on those 2 bosses, just solid as a rock. Now we're going to build a tower of exactly the right height that can hold this end of the cable, probably a washer of some sort for this to go through and lock in place. Then the cable will come out of here and connect to the rod that I showed you earlier down here at this distal end. Now I made a vertical piece here with a 5/8 inch hole which will hold the end of the cable. The cable then will come out here and make a kind of a gentle S shape and go in through the firewall. I'm going to brace this now with a triangular brace and then weld it all together and paint it, and it should be very presentable. Here's that bracket for the accelerator linkage. It's all welded up, ground and painted. Now it's time to cut the cable to fit so that it'll make that passage from here to here. Okay, here's the plan. The rod has been cut to the right length to work with that cable and the cable end. I threaded the end of the rod so that the clevis that I made out of stainless steel with its captive nut can be adjusted back and forth about a 1/2 inch. Now that would be a good name for a band, Captain Clevis and the Captive Nuts. Okay, so now it's ready to be fit up to the carburetors and adjusted, and let's see if it'll work. And I drilled a small hole here in this end of the rod so I can put in a cotter pin so it can't fall out of that big control arm with all the holes in it. Okay, and I have a nice short 1/4 inch bolt here to connect the clevis to the cable end. Well, the linkage is all finished. I had to remove the tower piece here to drill another hole in it. I'll explain why in a second. But I took advantage of that to cut off that needless corner that stuck out over here. I thought this triangular shape was more pleasing, so I cut it, ground it, and repainted it. Okay, so what I found after I got it all together is that the return spring on just the primary carburetor was not strong enough to overcome the friction of the linkage and the cable. So I had to put in a supplementary spring, you see it down here, from the bottom of that arm here all the way back to an adjustable threaded rod that I have here with an adjustment nut in the back, so I can adjust the tension on the arm so that it will return the primary carburetor butterflies back to absolute idle rest position. You don't want that hanging open in the middle of traffic. Okay, so what I'll do, I'm going to get Ollie to get in the car and step on the gas, and you'll get to watch the linkage in action. Okay, Ollie, step on the gas. There's the linkage. It's all finished. It's fully adjustable as to travel and spring tension. Now all that's left to be done is the primary fuel supply right here, which will include the fuel pressure regulator, which hasn't come yet after 9 long and miserable days, and a fuel filter, a real nice one that you can disassemble and clean. Okay, so those two pieces are going to be right in here in series, and then we'll run the fuel line down and to the metal fuel line that comes from the gas tank. Well, miracle of miracles, the fuel pressure regulator arrived, and it's set right here at 2.5 pounds. There wasn't room to put the filter in back here, so I'm going to run the fuel line around over here, have the filter probably vertically right over on this side, and then we'll go down and connect to the steel fuel line from the tank. So this side here is officially finished. Just thought you might enjoy a quick little visual tour. And once I get the fuel line connected, I can pressurize the carburetors, and of course fuel will probably come flying out of every fitting. And then the Pertronix Distributor will malfunction and start it on fire, but we can only hope. Okay, what a video that would make. Let's keep our fingers crossed, and let me finish up with the fuel system, and then we'll proceed. Okay, so now we have the Stromberg 97's installed on the engine with the fuel lines. We've got the adjustable linkage for the throttle, the fuel pressure regulator, and now let's take a look at where the fuel filter ended up. And it's right down here. Now I know that seems like an odd place, but it's very accessible there. I was thinking about running it back here behind the engine where it would probably never get changed or cleaned, but instead I ran the fuel line up, made a loop, and then went up to the carburetors and the fuel block first. But you can see it right down here. You can unscrew it. It's got the little sintered glass filter in there. It's easy to get to and easy to change. One other thing that I added, because it's winter time here now, with temperatures, like I said, plunging down into the 50s, but I ran a choke line up here and then added a fitting, one of those little fittings that locks onto the ball ends that are on this type of linkage, and now I can adjust the choke from inside the car with just the standard old black choke knob, and it really helps starting up here in the cool weather. Okay, so that's it. It's all finished, and I have, of course, test driven it and made some minor adjustments, and what I'll do is started up for you so you can hear it, and then we'll go for a ride. One other job I did on the car, which was long overdue, when I got it, it had no glass at all, and previously I'd put in the little quarter windows and a nice tinted back window here, but the roll-up windows was something I dreaded doing, but I finally did it. Okay, and it was even worse than I expected. As you can see here now, there's a nice brand new window roller, and the problem was that when they chopped the top, they destroyed the channels in the door that the glass passes through, and then they also welded the upper part of the door on crooked, so there was no way that a straight channel or a flat piece of glass could pass through it. So I had to reshape the doors and fabricate the steel channels by hand and install them here. They're welded in, and then I bought the 1/4 inch tinted laminated safety glass with brand new rollers, regulators, handles, everything. And what started out, what I thought would be probably a difficult but inexpensive job, ended up being a very difficult and rather expensive job. It was about $400, believe it or not, to put roll-up windows in the car. But I think it does sort of add an air of sophistication to it. Okay, so now it's time to start her up and go for a little spin. Okay, before we start up, I thought I'd take a quick walk around. Also, of course, we have the idiot with the leaf blower in the background, who started the minute that I got out a video camera. Oh, I really like that old pinstriping. Okay, let's set up a tripod and we'll start it up and drown out that clown with the leaf blower. Okay, while the Lord of the Idiots drones away across the street on his second hour of uninterrupted leaf blowing, let's go ahead and fire this beast up. Okay, the door's open. Let's climb aboard and take a little ride out in the countryside. Okay, I got the camera on a tripod taped to the seat, so let's start her up and get ready for a ride. Well, here we are back home safely and in one piece. I hope you enjoyed the ride and this sort of supplementary video series on modifications to the engine in the 1930 Model A chopped in channel coupe. Thanks.